Joined by Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard, our ABC contributors, Donna, Brazile, and Matthew Dowd, Steve Rattner, former counselor to the Treasury Department, and Greta Van Susteren of Fox News. Welcome to all of you. Bill Kristol, we just heard that debate right there. Both senators agree that there should be no amnesty for Edward Snowden, but in some sense, has he been vindicated?
No, because there's been no abuse, no illegality, in my view, under the Supreme Court precedent, Smith v. Maryland, no criminality. I'm a defender of the NSA program, and I think everyone's being very glib about, well, this metadata raises concerns. There's been just no evidence that anyone's privacy has actually been abused. And when you think about the program for a minute and say, well, how would it be abused? 22 intelligence officers, military, et cetera, are going to get together in a room and decide, let's go look at Donna Brazile's phone records, or let's abuse the... I mean, it is a collection of metadata. You do need to go to a judge to get a warrant to really go down and see who Donna's talking to from Yemen or whatever. And so I think a lot of this is people, we need to be serious about the national security side of this, obviously serious about the constitutional side of it as well. But I think there's an awful lot of glib talk about abuses of privacy without any evidence of abuses of privacy.
I'm shaking my head because I think, Bill, you're dead wrong. Smith versus Maryland, I think, will be proven to be a wrong decision, much like Plessy versus Ferguson was wrong.
You should explain. This is the 1979 Supreme Court decision that did say that the government, or the police in this case, could collect the phone records of one individual.
That's right. And the Supreme Court has reversed itself before, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education. All you have to do is one thing. Go back to the Fourth Amendment. It's not an option. The Constitution is right that says, right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated. If the government thinks this information is so important, it can get it. It just has to use a warrant. There is no fear exception because everyone's terrified about terrorism. There's no fear exception to the Constitution. If you don't like this, change the Constitution. But we don't want just a bunch of people in a back room doing their own modifications.
Police can cruise up and down streets looking for problems. If they want to go into a house, they have to get a warrant. This is the equivalent of police cars cruising up and down streets looking for problems. And guess what? Putting more police cars.
The right of the people to be secure in their person's house.
Let me try this another way. I personally think that this will be found to be legal. The commission found that it was legal. We can argue about Smith versus Maryland, but I'm not sure it's going to be overturned. But let me make a different distinction. You have a program that I think has been determined to be legal, but you clearly have a situation in which Americans are uncomfortable. They feel that their privacy is being violated. They feel that this is too intrusive. I think the president is going to draw an appropriate line, move this metadata out of the government's control, but somewhere else where it can still be accessed, make some changes that give people more comfort, but maintain the program. And the important point about this commission report, it's more of a facelift than open heart surgery. They're recommending some tweaks, but the fundamental right of the government to operate in this area is maintained.
Because they're dismissive of the Constitution.
Is that everyone seems so much more comfortable, and I wonder about this, with the records being kept in a private company rather than the government.
Well, that's a huge question I have, is whether that's actually going to be a helpful thing or a hindrance thing. You asked the question of, was Edward Snowden vindicated? I think he's been totally vindicated on this. In the history of the United States, there's always been a pendulum and a balance between national security and civil liberties. We've swung way in the direction, too much in the direction of national security and the idea that we can gather all this data. And it's not just eavesdropping on a phone call. You can identify where somebody eats, who they sleep with, all that, without ever listening to a phone call. And the government can do that today. I think what Edward Snowden did, and you asked an appropriate question to Senator Udall, is would we have ever had this debate at all? And my view is we weren't having it before, and we're now having it today. So I think Edward Snowden was vindicated.
You know, when it comes to national security, there has to be a middle ground between protecting the interests of the individual and making sure that we protect the nation at large. There has to be a middle ground between Edward Snowden and Dick Cheney. And I think President Obama is going to have to strike the right tone when he makes a definitive statement after all of these recommendations. But I think most Americans are uncomfortable with the knowledge that they are learning now about all of the searches, the seizure of information, and they want some accountability.
But here's the dilemma, and I bring this to Bill Kristol and then go to Kurt.
But it's just the Constitution's so plain on this. If you just read the plain language of the Fourth Amendment, there's just no way you can get around it. Either get a warrant and you can get all the information you want, Bill,
but Greta, this has been litigated. This has been litigated over and over and over again.
Well, apparently one judge disagrees with that.
One judge. And even this commission didn't find any evidence of illegality in these programs.
So-called law professors.
So the question is, what do people people expect when do they expect that this information should be private? You could argue that they've given up a lot of that privacy already to companies. But the question I want to bring to you, Bill Kristol, as you point out, the panel said that there's been no abuse of this program. They also said that this surveillance program hasn't made that much of a difference in national security.
Look, it's hard to judge from the outside. I'm worried as a policy matter. I think serious policymakers need to figure out, are we depending too much on metadata? Are we shortchanging human intelligence, et cetera? The president, the director of national intelligence are presumably spending a lot of time worrying about that and trying to appropriately balancing it. I don't agree with all this stuff. Thank God for Edward Snowden. We wouldn't be having this debate. We had a big debate in Congress on this in 2006, 2007. And in fact, we passed legislation in 2007. We had a big debate about this. President Obama discussed this.
And
President Obama is a constitutional law professor. He came to office very concerned about the terrible
which is exceedingly disappointing.
Then he became president. I'm sorry. Then he became president of the United States. He got all the briefings. He saw seriously what was going on, and basically he decided, I think correctly, that you know what, the balance is probably pretty appropriately struck.
But now he's shifting.
Now he's shifting entirely because of optics and because people have sense.
Because of Edward Snowden, the revelations.
But not because of any actual revelation of any actual abuse. We know what real abuses are. We know what was done to Martin Luther King in the 60s. We know what the CIA abuses were like in the 70s. There's nothing like that.
Well, when you have heads of states complaining about their phone records also being looked at and pried upon. Look, George, the states are already taking the lead across the country. California has now passed 3 laws to prevent online piracy. Montana has passed laws. Texas. The states will begin to enact laws that will ensure that our privacy rights are protected while the federal government sits around and figure out what the hell we're doing.
And the government has never demonstrated that. What they keep saying is that what Edward Snowden did endangered the country. They've never said one piece of verifiable information that they put out that says actually that's true.
But Senator Udall, I think, was right saying have him come back and answer.
I agree
he never went through the whistleblower.
Civil disobedience.
There was a mechanism to be a whistleblower, and he just bypassed it, and did that.
Yeah, he's not getting amnesty. We got to take a break.